Okay, hello everybody. This is Monday, April 12th, and we have a special guest today. Professor MagalianBerthon teaches in Costume Studies program at NYU. I often go to her class, and it's a great privilege to invite her back to my class. This is History of East Asian Costume. We were studying modern fashion, like a modern era in East Asian costume, dress history, like 1850 through, we went to up to 1930s. Professor MagalianBerthon just defended her dissertation at the Royal College of Art. Congratulations for your PhD. Her topic is called Silk in Contemporary Cambodia, Weaving a History of Survival. And the period is rather recent. It's 1990 to 2018. But she can also comment on the continuation of this traditional heritage technique. So without further ado, let's ask Professor Berthon to start her lecture.
Thank you so much for having me, Kyunghee and Pyun. It's really nice to be here with you. I hope you enjoyed the ride. Sorry for the technical glitches starting. So let me share my screen. Okay. Is it working?
Yes, okay. It's working.
Thank you. So just, I defended my thesis just a little bit ago, just a month ago, actually, but I'm really happy to be here to talk more about Cambodia, because this is not like a country, especially in terms of textiles, that is very much known. And so it's always a pleasure to be able to bring awareness to their textile traditions and also to what's going on there in terms of practice, and even moving into conversation about fast fashion, which is what I'm trying to do here with this title, the Cambodian textile paradox, from artisanal silk weaving to fast fashion garment industries, because looking at contemporary Cambodia gives you a little bit of that dual, two pictures basically together of work that is artisanal, that is ancestral, that has been dating for centuries, and the establishment of new textile manufacturing practices through fast fashion since, let's say, the 1990s or so, that is also changing the landscape of the country in itself. So let's start. So let's start with the map, which is something I like doing, which is, it helps understanding things. So Cambodia is a landlocked country that is almost nearly landlocked country. It's open to the Gulf of Thailand on the seaside, but most of the rest of the country is a small country surrounded by Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand, direct neighbors, and it's within the area of what we call Southeast Asia. So we're moving a bit south to East Asian, exploration, and it's also mainland Southeast Asia in the sense that there's also Indonesia, Malaysia, that is part of Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of differences between all those regions, between Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Cambodia, but also some common threads, no pun intended. But we'll be trying to look into the significance of Cambodian textiles. If you look here on the right image, those major ethnic groups in Southeast Asia, there's a combination of them, the main one being in the island area of Malaya, Indonesia. And then in Cambodia, the major ethnic group will be Mon Khmer. So sometimes I might be talking about Khmer people or Cambodian people. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's connected to the same history. So this is a closer map of Cambodia. It's a country that is not very big. It's about the size of the state of Oklahoma, to give you an understanding. It's about 69,900 square miles. And also population is quite of a small country. In 2018, it was about 16 million people. I was talking already about the Khmer as a language in the main ethnic group. So Khmer population, the ethnic group of Khmer is dominant in Cambodia. It represents about 98% of the population. The rest of the population is Cham people. They're often Muslim also. And then ethnic Chinese, ethnic Vietnamese, and then also some hill tribes in the northern part. What is interesting also to know about the country is that it's a strongly agricultural country. There's some urban centers are developing, specifically around Phnom Penh in the how can I go back? In the capital city of Phnom Penh, that's like one of their main urban center. But the rest is mostly at 80% agriculture and rural areas. And the other important aspect but it's growing obviously in city centers. It's the age, the median age, the average age of people in Cambodia is very young. It's 25.7 years old, meaning that the majority of the population is, the median age is basically that there's 50% of people that are below 25 years old and 50% are above 25 years old, which is very, very young as a population. And that can be explained through their histories, the history of that country that I'm going to explain a bit more very soon. So the capital city, as I mentioned, is Phnom Penh. It's a tropical climate with 2 rainy seasons that you have here, rainy season from May through October and dry season from October to May. It's mostly quite of a warm country, I would say. And then let's have a quick look at the styles of Cambodian dress that you can find in the area. And then I'll go more into detail about the history and what's there. So I'm focusing more on women's dress, but men also wear silk sometimes. And a lot of my exploration as part of my PhD was looking at silk specifically. People wear on a daily basis, they wear Western style clothing, any type of clothing that we would wear, like jeans and t-shirts and sandals, for example, and shirts. But for ceremonial purposes, for weddings, to go to the pagoda, for specific religious Buddhist ceremonies, because Cambodia is also at 98% Buddhist, the attire is mostly silk. So that is still important to the present day. So you have examples here on the left of young Cambodian women in the formal attire. So they're wearing what we call an aor, which is a little bodice. And then they're, let me see if I can write that in the chat box. There are different ways of writing this. So there are different typing, because, it's just a transcription of Cambodian language. So the aor is a bodice, the tube skirt is called sampot. And if it has some ikat motif, it will be a sampot hol, and we'll get to talk more about that. And often it also comes with a sash around the chest that is called krama, which means scarf. So this is kind of the typical attire that a young lady or even an older lady would wear to go to the temple to pray. If you look at the images on the left, also it's interesting to see the top bodice is often made of lace, and white also, or sometimes embroidered with gilded sequins and things like that. But it's quite simple-ish as a style. At the center, we also have, it's a picture of a weaver called Pyun that I met also in the southern part of Cambodia, near the capital city of Phnom Penh. And she was showing me the first green silk sampot that she had woven. And I'm writing it here, it's in the Pamong style. It's silk satin with usually a band of brocaded gilded thread at the bottom. So this also we'll talk about more. And she was quite proud because she had kept those for a very long time and was able to show them to me. And then on the right image, we have a model in this case. She's dressed up with also ikat motifs. You can see them as polychromic, meaning they're multicolored ikat pieces. And she was wearing trousers that are wrapped trousers. that we called samput to also designate the bottom clothing. And in this case, chongkaben refers to the wrap trousers. And there are some connections here with Thai attire as well. And then moving into more performance garments. So on the left, we have an image of a Khmer classical ballet dancer. She's fully dressed with very shiny silk clothing and also some gilded decorations and a headpiece. And her skirt is also a samput, which is it's also always a term for tube skirt, that is pleated, gathered toward the front. And the ground material is a brocade textile. And for brocade, we call that chorbap. So there are lots of different terms. And then at the center, you have folk dance. So it's more, folkloric. And she's also, the ladies and the dancers are dressed up with a top bodice in silk, and those pants are also draped around the body. And then you have an image on the right of a groom and a bride in a wedding attire this time, so very gilded, like a lot of gold on their clothing, a lot of sequins, a lot of embroidery, adornments. And so the groom and the bride in Cambodia, they're allowed to dress as kings and queens, as would the king or as would the queen, which is something that is quite specific to this culture as well. But they go full-blown, really lavish attire when they get married, and sometimes also they change attire a few different times. Another few examples of that typology of garment. For a long time, there was some significance in terms of color. It's something that you can also find in Thailand, actually, where you would wear a color every different day. And every different day was associated with a color. So red would be associated to the color for Sunday, yellow for Monday, purple for Tuesday, light green for Wednesday, dark green for Thursday, blue for Friday, and kind of eggplant aubergine for Saturday. So you have an image here from the 50s that is showing that also. Every day is a different style of color. There's some significance there, I think, within cosmology, and Thai people also proceed to kind of the same significance, same symbolic. And on the right, it's a picture of the krama, a different type of krama. We saw the version that was in silk. This one is the most common one. It's usually cotton, even now polyester. And it's a little bit the common cloth that is worn to do anything. You can wear it as a scarf, you can wear it to protect your head, you can wear it as a baby carrier, as a tube skirt. It's a little bit like the ubiquitous, typical Cambodian cloth, basically, that is worn. It's often like this, a simple plaid of, two colors together. So this was kind of an overview of what you have in terms of dress styles and typologies of clothing and textiles. And now if I'm moving, and I'm going to be kind of jumping in history a lot, but if we're moving a bit in history about silk in Cambodia, there's about the first record, let's say, of Cambodian history, Cambodian silk in Cambodia dates from the 13th century. And it's not from a Cambodian narrator, Cambodian diarist. It's from a Chinese one. So a man called Chu Takwon was a witness that was sent from the court of China to the court of Angkor, Angkor Wat. So Angkor Wat is the term for the big temple that you find in Siem Reap area. And Angkor Wat was built during the Angkor Empire, or the Khmer Empire. And so that was, in the early modern era, very powerful empire that crossed over different regions. It went over Thailand at the time, and a big, large chunk of Southeast Asia. So the Khmer Empire started in the 900s and until the late 1400s. So at that time, where Chu Takwon, a Chinese envoy, went to Cambodia, he was witnessing what was going on there, and he wrote a lot of what he saw. Obviously, we don't know, we don't have proof that it was all true, but it's kind of the first record of life then in Cambodia that we have, so it's a starting point at least. So what he said, that he did not see Cambodian weavers learning or knowing anything about silk. They did not know how to grow silk, cultivate silkworms, or even rear silk or create silk or weave it. He thought, he witnessed that the people who had that knowledge were from Siam, which means Thailand. So this is his record from that time. So we don't exactly know what was going on. What we know is that from that point on, Cambodian weavers eventually started to learn silk, or started to master silk. So what we have from that time, we don't have any textiles left from the 13th century. Nothing was kept due to the climate, but also due to the nature of the country that was not in a culture that would conserve things, that would keep things necessarily the way maybe European cultures would do at the same time, the early modern era and the medieval and the early modern era. Because of, in Europe, for example, it would have been kept by churches as treasuries and things like that, but that's something that was not really part of Southeast Asian culture. So what we have as evidence is those stone carvings, for example. We have stone carvings on the left that are representing those celestial beings that we call Apsara. They're, celestial dancers. They're dancing at the for the king and also for the gods. And so if you can see them that they're dressed up. They're dressed up with the wrapped tube skirt in some ways, and within the carving of the stone, you see the representation of the drapery on it. And they're bare-chested at the time, but they wear very impressive headpieces as well. Another image of that, another Apsara that you can find on the Angkor Wat temple from the 12th century, it also shows that impressive drapery effect that is mimicked through the wood carving. If you look at it, interestingly, you can see almost the legs coming from through the cloth. So that gives an information that maybe those cloths were translucent or lightweight, in a very light material. It could have been silk, maybe it was cotton, maybe it was imported. It could have been imported at the time from China or from India, that were two very powerful textile producers at the time and had developed extensive technologies of weaving. So we don't really know, don't have enough information, so we can only make some guesses. What is interesting though is to see those motifs. You see that tube skirt has a decorated band at the bottom, at the hem, and also some little floral stylized patterns on it. And on the right also, you can see some motifs that are also carved on the walls of certain temples. They're also showcasing specific medallion motifs like this one. So this also gives us some information of how there was a visual material culture that may have been transcribed within textiles as well. So, and also if you look at those sculptures from the 9th century to the 15th century, you can see different stages in an evolution in styles as well, in terms of draping and clothing. So there was a fashion that was existing that people would wear. So no textiles was found before the 19th century. The oldest examples I may share with you very soon date from the 19th century only, because these were the ones that were kept intact from that time, and nothing before that. So I'm shifting a bit in time. Oh, yeah. I'm going to explain here because I don't have images, but what I can say in between those time until, let's say, the 19th century is that from the 16th, 17th century, Cambodia continued to exist as the empire. It shrunk a bit to the benefit of other kingdoms, like the Kingdom of Siam and Burma, also the Kingdom of Burma. So it lost a little bit of its power, but it continued to produce silk. We don't have a huge amount of information, but we know that silk, Cambodian silk, were praised and sought after by rulers and also by Thai rulers that would consume them and order commission them. So moving into time, we move into some gifts also that were made in the 19th century from the King of Thailand to, for example, the President of the United States of the time, Franklin, as a diplomatic gift. So for the King of Thailand, Mongkut ordered 3 pattern pieces in silk from Cambodian weavers and then gifted them to the US president. So that shows a use, at least. Not Franklin Roosevelt, the what's his name? Franklin Pierce. So before that, in the 1850s. So it would be Franklin Pierce. And so that shows that Cambodian textiles were really appreciated by the elite, by royalty, used as diplomatic gifts, and had garnered some impact around the world. And that brings us to this map here that speaks about the French colonization. So the French started to have some imperial interest by, the 19th century, and their imperial interests also sent them to Southeast Asia. They started to invade different regions, especially Vietnam, and then expanded in Laos. You see here Tonkin and Cochin China, which are kind of making now present-day Vietnam, and also Cambodia. And in Cambodia, the French established what we call a French protectorate in 1863, and it lasted until 1953. So the French protectorate allowed Cambodia to keep its ruler. So the king of Cambodia continued to be at the head of the state, but that was a bit of just for the show. The French would really control all the administration. And they were interested in silk. They were. Silk in France was pretty a big industry. In Lyon area, they would have their own sericulture, silk production of fiber, but also a lot of silk weaving existing of luxury silks. And at the time, they had some issues with their silkworms. There was like this silk disease happening in France. So when they moved to Indochina, they tried to arrive in Southeast Asia. I think there was some interest in using their resources and using silk as resources. One of the expressions of that interest in silk is the foundation of a school called the School of Cambodian Arts, and it was founded in 1917, 1920. So the idea of this school was to, well, it's kind of a colonialist idea that they need to come as a civilizing mission, that colonizers have knowledge of how things are right and good. So they arrived in Cambodia thinking, oh, Cambodians have like lots of skills, but the production and the crafts is kind of falling apart. That was the idea. Was that demonstrated? It was hard to tell. It was written in certain accounts, but was it accurate? We don't know. But that was the idea that French colonizer had, and the idea for them was to revive crafts, so to save them in some ways. Obviously, that's a debatable goal, but that led to the foundation of that School of Cambodian Arts. And it was directed by a man called Georges Grolier. And Georges Grolier was a Frenchman. He was the first man to grow up in Cambodia. He was born in Cambodia. And he was a protector of the arts. Let's say he loved the arts. He loved Cambodian dance. He loved Cambodian crafts. So he was the one who was put in charge in that school. And in that school, they had lots of different workshops, not just silk, also metalware, lacquerware, wood carving. So all kinds of different arts that would be practiced at the time. And young Cambodians could join and learn and be hired to produce products, artifacts. And so there was a silk workshop. You have a photo here, it's a postcard, but it represents that School of Cambodian Arts, and you can see some women weaving in the back on floor looms, and then some spinning wheels as well for silk threads. So what was interesting is that they produced also a lot of textiles during that time, and those textiles would be sold in Europe, in France, specifically through universal exhibitions in the 1920s. So they produced maybe thousands of pieces that would be then sold in France, because France had like a real craze for the exotic at the time, specifically in the 1900s, 1920s. And they wanted to consume products from the colonies while also, while following specific crazes and trends. And silk, Cambodian silk was one of them at the time. So this is an example of what a Cambodian silk from 1900 would look like. It's an example that is from the art gallery in New South Wales in Australia. And you see the kind of typology of textile that it is. It's just the bottom end. It's red ground. It's ikat. So ikat, as you know, probably is a tie-dye technique where you tie-dye the threads before putting them on the loom. It's a resist dye technique where instead of doing this on the cloth like you would do with a tie-dye t-shirt, you would do that on threads and then we'll put that in the loom. In the case of Cambodian ikat, we're into weft ikat, meaning that what is tie-dyed is the weft threads. And so this is typically what would have been developed at the time in Cambodia in the 1900s, those red ground, all in natural dyes, and some stylized motifs, geometric motifs, and also some auspicious motifs in them. I'm showing an image on the right of what we call patola, which is a double ikat from India. There was also all the craze in the late 1900s. So there's some connections, I think, visually in terms of the composition of the textile design here. And we think that, there were some correlations or influences, cross influences between Indian textiles and Cambodian textiles per se. There's also an idea that maybe the French really liked Cambodian silks because they reminded them of what Indian silk were produced, the way they were produced and how they looked like. And that for this reason, I think they thought maybe this is like the opportunity to have our own commodity as well within the Cambodian silk styles. And then we're moving a bit into history, and we're moving a bit closer to a very dark part of Cambodian history. So these are images from the independence time. So Cambodia gained independence in 1953, as I mentioned, and the king went back to power, and there was a little bit of a golden age, as we think, between 1953 and 1965, 68, around that time. So silk continued to be produced at the time for different uses. You have an image on the left of a film that was actually made by the prince himself, Norodom Sihanouk, because he was an aspiring filmmaker also. He had a bit of a, he was a lover of the arts, but also loved to produce some films. Some of them were at his glory, some of them were a bit of propaganda movies. And this is a bit one of them. He was making a movie at the glory of his own, era that we call the Sangkum era. But we see a lot of representation of weaving and silk in that film. And then the photo on the right, it shows a bit more the reality of life at the time, and people were still quite poor, and they would be more rural, and they would not necessarily benefit from this idea of modernity that the government and the prince wanted to share and showcase. And so people continue to wear, daily attire of like krama scarf on their heads and simple outfits in their daily lives. So there's a contrast still at the time between those two moments. And then we're moving into kind of dark moments of Cambodian history, of 20th century history. So by the 1970s, there's a coup that from General Lon Nol that reversed and that overthrew the royalty. So King Sihanouk had to flee. And I mean, it's a complicated history. I'm not going to go too much in detail, but King Sihanouk was overthrown to the benefit of General Lon Nol. So this changed the landscape of political life in Cambodia, and then had some very problematic continuation. And from that Lon Nol general, then the Khmer Rouge regime, the Khmer Rouge people started to gain traction and gain power. So the Khmer Rouge people, they were, I'm sure you've heard about that term before. They were a faction of people that were communist revolutionaries. A lot of them had been trained actually in French universities and learned about socialism there. And it was a whole moment of rise of independence, trying to, countries like Vietnam, also other countries trying to reclaim their independence. So it's this kind of very troubled time. And the Khmer Rouge eventually overthrew Lon Nol and took over power. And that's the start of the Khmer Rouge regime that lasted for only 4 years, but that was absolutely destructive for Cambodian history. So first, it was an authoritarian revolutionary regime that almost lived in autarky, like meaning that they didn't have a lot of connections with the other world, though they had some support from China at some point. And they targeted anything that related to the monarchy, intellectuals, artists, anything that spoke about luxury. So, and that, logically impacted silk a whole lot. It was a humanitarian disaster as well. There were a lot of purges, people faced starving and sanitary crisis. So at the end of that, the regime in 4 years claimed 1.7 million victims. So at the time, the country was about 8 million. So it's almost 20% of the population that was killed or died in 4 years. So a very dramatic time. It's also a moment where a lot of, there was a refugee crisis. A lot of Cambodian fled to the Thai border and then eventually moved outside Southeast Asia to Europe, to the US and Australia. So this image here that I'm sharing here, it's actually a propaganda film from that time, the Democratic Kampuchea, which is the name of that, is kind of the party of the Khmer Rouge, the political party. So it's a propaganda image that is showing the practice of silk at the time. But the reality is that silk was really stopped or nearly destroyed. Silk production as a fiber stopped. There were just very few regions that continued to produce. And then weavers were displaced, moved to other villages. They couldn't really continue to produce anything. And a lot of them also died. So that impacted the production very much. Cambodian, from the Khmer Rouge, specifically established specific uniforms. They forbade the use of color. People could not dress with silk anymore, except in some diplomatic moments where it would to be showcased for the outside world. So people would dress up like this on the left in black and white and black pajamas style. And they would wear the krama that I mentioned, but often in a red and white color. So that would become kind of the signal of Khmer Rouge people. And then I mentioned the Cambodian refugee crisis also happening at the time. So very destructive time. And that's a little bit what I'm looking at. It's like from that moment where everything is destroyed, how to look into what happens after, how to kind of continue that. What has continued between what I mentioned, this whole history from, let's say, the 12th century to the present day when something like this happens in a country of that size. So eventually, the Khmer Rouge regime was overthrown at that time by Vietnamese forces and then supported after that by the international community. And so the country had like about 10 years between 1980 and 1990 of a lot of struggles basically to get back on its feet. And the country really mostly reopened by the early 1990s with the signing of the peace accords in 1991. And that moved the country into reopening to international funding and NGOs also that arrived. And the other factor of that is the arrival of government factories as well. So garment factories is something that has been arriving in Cambodia since the 1990s, let's say in the late 1990s, early 2000s. A lot of those factories are not Cambodian owned. They're often foreign owned, Chinese owned, or Singapore, Malaysian, I would say mostly Chinese. So those factories hire low wages Cambodian workers. And the conditions of life, have been documented. Some of them were quite difficult. The conditions for those factory employees have improved a bit in time in terms of salaries, but also in terms of conditions because of, more, the international community trying to kind of push those civil rights. So the yeah, it's a big part of the Cambodian economy. It's about 40% of Cambodia's GDP that comes from garment manufacturers. That's something to think about. And it's, well, from 2017, the numbers I have is there were about 1,500 factories. Who knows how much now with post-COVID, that I don't know. But it employed around 800,000 workers in 2017. So it's a big chunk of Cambodia's economy, and people work really a lot into those factories. The minimum wage has moved from $61 in 2012 to $182 in 2018. So that also is a big difference. Knowing that the average salary maybe has gone up a bit, for a long time, the average salary in Cambodia was $50 a month for a long time. So not a lot of money there. So now they're making $182 since 20. So that's a reality of Cambodia that is important, because the people that are going to work in factories often are maybe weavers or from families of weavers. They come from the countryside. There's no difference. These are not separate people that would go either in factories or continue weaving. It just depends on their physical condition, if they can bear that kind of work, if they don't have children at home, if someone can support them. So there's a lot of factors, but I want to stress out that these are not different people. They're the same people coming from the same areas that are working either in one direction or the other. Here. So these are just a few more pictures. Something to know also is the idea of commute. If you go in certain regions, like in the south of Cambodia, south of Phnom Penh, you'll see those big, buses or trucks that are carrying people. And these are workers from the factory that go home when they go early in the morning, work in the factories. And those are, also things that you can find in markets. Some of these things are produced on site, t-shirts, printed t-shirts. So those are also in combination with the tourism that is happening a lot in Cambodia. Tourism, the one draw of tourism is the Angkor Wat temples in the city of Siem Reap, also visiting Phnom Penh. And you can see those in markets, sometimes raw silk or tablecloth. A lot of those are either fake silk or imported or made in factories. They're not actually artisanal silk. So you have to be careful if you go to Cambodia on the market and what it's written, it's not always what it is. And then moving into silk more, this is a little bit what I was talking to you about silk production in Cambodia. These are, ballpark numbers, because it's hard to find really clear data from that time because of all those traumatic events. But we think that before the 60s, 50s, production of tons of silk, local silk, was about 25 tons, between 25 and 50 tons. And then after, by 1980, it was around 0.8 tons of silk produced on site. And then through different support from NGOs and subsidies, and a little bit of the Cambodian government, but not too much, mostly foreign NGOs. There's been more silk produced in Cambodia and than less. And recently, in the past, let's say 5-10 years, production has gone down again. So you can see that the silk there, the production is quite small. So a lot of the silk is also imported. Now, in present day, the indigenous type of silk that is produced is around 1 to 3 tons a year. So it means that about 499 tons are imported from either China or Vietnam or Thailand as well. So these are the regions where silk is still produced in the present day. So the regions in orange are more the weaving areas, and then the yellow regions are the very rare silk production, silk fiber sericulture areas. And to learn more about silk, there's a lot of different posts, a lot of different, if you break it down the chain, there's a lot of different materials, but also a lot of different activities that you can find. Sometimes mulberry tree farmers will also be the one who would grow silk. Sometimes they will also do the spinning and the dyeing. Sometimes the weavers will also do the silk dyeing. So there's different families of activities, but sometimes those are combined. In terms of product, to feed mulberry silkworms, you have to feed them with mulberry leaves. So there's also the need to have mulberry trees fields, basically. And that was something that was missing after the Khmer Rouge. We only found about 15 hectares of fields, so not a lot of trees left. So you need the leaves to feed the silkworms. And then from silkworms, they will make silk. And then you extract that silk in different grades and different qualities, and you would dye that either in chemical, natural dyes, and then put them into weaving. And then sometimes after that, there's also seamstresses and people that would tailor those pieces. The type of silk in Cambodia that is remarkable is this indigenous type here on the top part. And this indigenous silk is called golden silk, which is like a species from Southeast Asia. You have them in Cambodia. You also have some of those in Laos or in parts of Vietnam. But it's typically what you find in Cambodia. It's a bit of a different type of mulberry silkworm. It is still domesticated, but it makes this kind of yellow gold color. And then you have to wash it. The gold color washes away to be able to dye the material in the color that you want. So silkworm, you've never seen this, Kyunghee? Well, yeah, it's specific to Southeast Asia. You also have some gold type of silk in India, but it's a different species. This is really domesticated. It remains what we called Bombix mori. And yeah, it's interesting because it gives that kind of Goldilocks kind of color, but you have to wash it off to be able to add the dyes that you want. So it's a domesticated breed from Southeast Asia. I'm going to talk a bit more about that cycle. So the cycle for a worm to live is around 38 days. There's a lot of it goes through a lot of different cycles of life, a silkworm, from being a worm to becoming a cocoon to becoming a butterfly or moth. So we're trying to collect it before it becomes a moth. So you collect the cocoon before it hatches out and doesn't fly. So let me share some images here from different places that I've seen. So on the top left, you have eggs laid by female silk moths. So those little dots on the newspaper, these are eggs. And then those develop and you feed them with very fresh mulberry leaves. But they're very delicate animals, obviously. They don't survive well. You have to treat them well. You have to protect them from pests, from heat. If it's too hot, if it's too cold, they die. So they're very, very delicate animals. And you feed them with very fresh mulberry tree leaves, small ones and then bigger ones. And worms are voracious. They eat so much. So they eat until at some point, like, I think I've eaten enough. I think I'm ready to move on to my next life. And you see them for this specific kind turn yellow a bit. what you're seeing on the right top bottom picture, they're turning a bit yellow, which means they're ready to kind of move on. And this is how it goes. So you can put them in baskets, sometimes in those bushes of mulberry branches, and they become a poupée. And then turn into cocoons. So you see them turning into cocoons. And the idea is to collect them before they hatch. And once you do that, you have to kill them. It's not a vegan-friendly practice, obviously. And then you want to extract their threads. And to do that, you take a little bit of a number of cocoons because the threads are so fine. You put them in boiling water, not too hot, so it wouldn't damage the silk. And then you try to extract the silk threads from that process. And then from that, you refine the threads, make them, these ones are still coated. We call that the gum. They're still with that yellow gum here. And then eventually you have to clean them and remove that gum, which we call the degumming process. That allows you then to put them into dyes. So if you compare here, on the left, you have industrially produced silk imported from Vietnam. And then you have golden silk that is artisanally produced because they haven't developed a method to make them an industrial process. So you can imagine that the golden silk that is artisanal is going to cost way more than the industrial imported silk. And so there's a discrepancy also in qualities between Cambodian produced silk fiber and imported silk put into weaving. But most of it in Cambodia that you will buy, even if it's artisanally woven, will be imported. So that's interesting, I think, to think about what makes a product Cambodian, for example, if we're anywhere. Is it because the fiber is local? Is it because the craftsmanship is local? Is it because you can buy it there? So all those questions are, I think, kind of challenging the idea of authenticity and what that means, and also connecting identities, national cultural identities to materials. And then showing you a bit more of those different weaving techniques. So you had an image of that Piep. She was wearing that, showing me the silk that she was making. One of the styles that is popular is this one. Is a satin silk, and you have a brocaded band of metallic threads. So that's the pamung. Sometimes it's what we call shot silk, meaning that one thread is one color and the other thread is the other. It makes like a bit of a beetle color, like iridescence to it. So that's something that's quite popular and worn a lot by younger women too, because they love bright colors and mostly chemical dyes now, present day. And then again, an image of the dancer, she's wearing a brocaded silk and metallic thread that is fully adorned with that brocaded motif, often geometric, sometimes stylized flowers, sometimes also auspicious elements here. A photo, it's not a great photo here, that is from a museum of a chorbap that is in that style. Also worn for ceremonial, for like weddings, for the elite, for royal events as well. And you can see here on the right image, the threads, the three-dimensionality, it's almost like a brocade with gold thread, and you can see it almost embossed on the fabric. And then the other type that is so well known and now almost thought as the most representative of Cambodian silk is this piece, the chonkaben, which means a very long piece of cloth, but in the ikat style, which is often called as hol. So this is the example I mentioned that was gifted from the King of Siam to the President Franklin Pierce. It's one of the oldest example that we have. It dates from 1856, and it's at the Smithsonian, actually, in the US. So that style is one of the most known about Cambodian silk. So more examples of that, Samput whole image that I took on the left from weavers, and they had those pieces in their collection. And then images also of an event where women were also dressed up in those ikats. So they usually have their red ground, historically were made of lac, which is insect based dye, a little bit like cochineal, but it's the kind of cochineal of Southeast Asia, if you want. It's hard to find now, and it used to be produced in Cambodia. It's not anymore. So the lac that you will find will be imported from Laos. Otherwise, in present day, it's mostly chemical dyes. So ikat is a practice that you'll find in Southeast Asia as a whole, and also in Indonesia quite a lot. But the interesting part is that there's weft ikat in the area of Cambodia, for example, and warp ikat will be more spread out in the regions of Indonesia. So warp would mean that you would tie and dye the threads of the warp threads and then weave like a weft thread, like a solid color. And it's the other way around in Cambodia. You would put a loom and a warp of one color, and then you would weave some threads that would be ikat weft threads. So just to give you the understanding of that practice, I still have, I'm a bit over time, but we started a bit after. I hope that's okay. This is the practice for it. On the left, you have the threads that have been washed and they're ready to be dyed. So there's a weaver who's going to create a motif, and she will do that by tying and dyeing some portions of the threads. And you will do that as many times as you need colors, because every time you want to create a new color, a new bath of color, you will have to tie areas, remove areas, and then dye them, deep dye them into some dye vats. So on the left, you have the woman creating a motif, and when she's over and finished, it would become what you see on the right, and this would be removed from that frame and then used into dyeing with all those little knots around. So these are knots. They're really tied very strongly around the threads to create areas where color will not take. And that's the principle of ikat. And then you would dye the areas as many times as you need. And then remove those little ties with a razor, very fine razor, to create, have that final example at the bottom. A piece like that is from the area of the workshop Golden Silk, is so complex. There's so many colors. You can see that here, there's like bright red, darker red, a yellow, a blue, a white. So there's like five steps, really, 5 steps of color to obtain that motif. And even just to tie and dye a piece like that successively would take probably 3 months or something, because it takes really a long time. And then once you have that thread ready, you'll spin it into bobbins, and then eventually you will weave it on the loom, the way you see on the right image. And you weave it in a way that fits the motif that you want to create on the cloth. So that also takes some time. There's a particularity about the weave structures in Cambodia is that usually those ikat are made of twill, irregular twill, 2-to-1 twill, so they're made on 3 shafts. And that's something that's specific to the area. You also have ikat style motifs in Thailand, for example, but they're not showing that twill structure. A few other examples here from different museums collections. Unfortunately, because of the war, a lot of the ikats that were held at the National Museum of Cambodia disappeared when the country, during and after the war. So there's a huge loss there. We don't really know where they went, if they were looted, if they were destroyed, if they were traded in exchange for people to survive. It's hard to know. But what we know is that they lost around 300 pieces that had been collected through the years. So a lot of the collections are in foreign museums, in Australia, in the US, a little bit, a lot in France, due, I guess, to connections due to that colony history, and then also in Britain. So this is where I was able to access and see those kind of very spectacular examples. Another style that is interesting in the area also is very typical to one southern part of Cambodia, Takeo, which is historically the region for silk weaving, is this style. So it's the same technique of ikat, but is pictorial. It tells a story. It has some story on it. So it takes even more time to create those in that way. And we call those pieces pidan. pieces, and they were made usually by weavers in villages as a gift for pagodas. And you can see an image here that they would be hung at the ceiling of pagodas as an offering, as a religious offering. So that's something that is also almost disappeared in terms of contemporary practices. There are a few weavers still doing that, but they're now supported by NGOs to do so. And those goods are now kind of not seen anymore in pagodas, but are bought by tourists or collectors who would want to acquire those pieces. Another example here that is held at the LACMA Museum in LA. And usually those scenes are representing scenes of religious scenes of the Buddhist tradition, often the stories of Buddha. But you have here images of those little apsara dancers and wearing, wrapped trousers with motifs here. If you look at the close-up, and also holding decorative parasols with like colors, and so it gives also an information about life. And representation of cultural life also, and cultural ceremonies in Cambodia, intertwined obviously with a lot of symbolic elements as well. And talking about, an organization that really supports this development, it's called Caring Khmer. It's actually Japanese supported organization. It's been set in Cambodia for at least 15, 20 years. And they're supporting weavers in producing those. They give training sessions for weavers in the area of Takeo in the south. And then they also commission them some pieces. You have an example on the top, on the loom that is being woven with indigo, because they're trying also to revive indigo practice. And then the piece that is on the right that is multicolor, also showcasing other motifs or more from the Cham tradition. And those are sold, around, I would say, between $800 to $1,500 as a piece. They try, at Caring for Young Men to support weavers, basically, to continue the craft. And they also don't charge them the materials. They give a better deal to weavers that would be probably independent otherwise, and that will work with intermediaries that would take a big cut on their work. So that's also something to notice. But those pieces will be bought by, tourists or collectors, not by local people, and not anymore. So that also changes the practice and its use. A piece like that probably would take 6 months to make. So if you think $1,500, it's not such a huge amount of money for all the hours that are put into making them. And I'm going to share a few, to finish, examples of other organizations that have been involved in silk productions in the 90s, since the 90s. There's something to say also about how practice has changed. There's some independent weavers still, especially in the area of Takeo. They weave for a domestic consumption, and they sell in markets. They have intermediaries that we call middlemen. They will order them the pieces and then buy them. And the middleman also loan the material, and the weaver has to pay that back. So it's not a very good deal for them. But sometimes women can't really go to the market. They're stuck at home. They have to take care of their children, take care of the home. Also, they do farming on the side. So it's an added income, but not like often a very comfortable one. That also explains why a lot of weavers and women specifically go into factories. That's the connection there. And on the other hand of the scope, you have all those bigger NGOs, foreign companies, French, Japanese, mostly, sometimes American, but mostly French and Japanese, that have been investing in silk production and supporting weavers. But they're also changing the style, changing the identity also because of their foreignness in some ways. And that brings a lot of differences, I think, within the landscape of silk. This organization here, Artisan d'Encore, was founded by French people in 1992. It was originally an NGO, a little bit, like with corporations and different types of craftsmanship, not just silk. And then now it's considered as a social enterprise. The Cambodian government has about 30% of the shares now, but the majority shareholder is still French company, private company. So there's, there's some money interest behind that. But nevertheless, it supports about 900 900 artisans, and a lot of weavers, like a few hundreds of weavers, to produce silk. And those are sold a lot to tourists. It's like mid-high range silk. So you have examples of ikat on the left and some also souvenir goods here. This is the ownership model that you have. I think that's interesting. There's some part that goes to an artisan association. The private French company I mentioned, they're industrialists called Vinci. And then private investors group, 10%, and then the Cambodian government. So it's not a fully Cambodian company. But Cambodian government most of the time is not very interested in supporting the arts or crafts or anything that happens like that in Cambodia. Some examples of what's going on there, the training, so they learn how to weave silk, but you would have a weaver that will learn weaving, just weaving on the loom, and you have a weaver that will learn just tying and dyeing. Usually weavers are not taught to train to learn all the steps, which is also to accelerate production in some ways. And they're often people that had no knowledge of silk whatsoever, sometimes people with underprivileged backgrounds, not literate. So it's also a different type of practice. They are trying to develop some things that I found interesting, some ergonomic looms also, using different models around benches. The person who really deals with them is Cambodian. The silk manager is Cambodian. And he's trying to also expand the practice and kind of move forward within craftsmanship, but have products that are very quality controlled also. And then there's this organization called Institute for Khmer Traditional Textiles that usually is called IKTT. It was founded by a Japanese man that passed away in 2017, Kiko Morimoto. And he's somebody that was commissioned by the UNESCO in 1994 to do a whole survey of silk in Cambodia in the post-war time. Though there were still some factions from Khmer Rouge and guerrilla factions happening in the country when he traveled around. So he tried to really do a survey of local sericulture, silk weaving, collecting thoughts and interviews, seeing what was out there. And from this, he created his own project in 1996. And he moved that project to Siem Reap, created also a whole village there of weavers. So these are images of that village near Siem Reap in the northern part, closer to Angkor Wat. And those are weavers that some of them he met during that trip in the 90s. And he convinced some of these women to come with him, to follow him and kind of reclaim the practice. So it's a bit different in the sense that they're not working with it's like families of weavers that were hired and convinced to continue the work with him, and paid better wages as well. And IKTT is interesting also because it really focuses on a holistic practice. So silk is locally produced. They have their own silk making as fiber, and everything is also natural dyes, which is not something that you have at artisanal core. Artisanal core silk is imported, good quality from China, and dyes are chemical. So it's a very different avenue. But the products are kind of more traditional per se. They're following more than the ancient motifs, the ancient techniques. But the people who buy are not Cambodians either. They're mostly tourists and a lot of Japanese tourists as well. So some other examples here. You have this woman, Pandam, also she knew silk from, she was hired in the 90s. She had that tradition of silk making. So she's been hired. She's one of the oldest women still working in the company. And then some images of the shop and those products they're higher range, more expensive. Artisan things would be around $150 to $150, $200, I would say, as a price range. Pieces here like more $300 to $500 for complex pieces, even more. So it's a different offer. At the present, we think there's about 70 families working for that IKTT company. And finally, you know, to think about the idea of chemical dyes versus natural dyes. Natural dyes still continued in some little projects that I mentioned. It's hard to make for weavers to continue. They may have the knowledge, even independent ones, but they have so many little money to make their pieces and to sell them that they will choose mostly chemical dyes and fast dyes. Artisan encore has really shifted toward fast dyes, but good quality ones are not harming the environment. So it's a conversation to have. Cambodians in general love color, whether chemical or natural, but color is very important within their aesthetic and culture. And these are some of the places that I've mentioned in my presentation. It's a short overview, but so basically, there's some challenges in the present day with silk weavers because they're tempted to leave the countryside, leave their life to go work in garment factories or go work in Thailand or leave jobs. There's not a lot of governmental support. It still relies so much on foreign aid, whether NGOs or so. Massive exports of white silk from other countries also impede the local production because it doesn't evens out. And tourism also changes a lot the practice and the meaning of those objects.
Thank you so much, Professor Berthon. And it's already 11:48, almost 11:50. So no, it's really wonderful. Do you have any question? Everybody turn on the camera. We can briefly see each other before we say bye. You know, like whenever we meet in WebEx, we see each other and then say hello. And then
WebEx, I like it. It's really cool. Yeah.
And then, so do you have any quick question? Anybody? Who? Nancy, you don't have any question? So, Magali, oh, Nancy, who said that? No. Okay. Somebody had a question. So my quick question is, the traditional technique of Cambodian silk is mostly ikat, but is there any other technique? Do they also do embroidery on their finished clothing, or do they any other kind of embellishments?
Well, on those textiles, the ikat ones, they don't do embellishments like pure ikat weaving. The embellishment is only present for the dance costume clothing that I've shown in some pictures, adding some sequins, some gilded thread. So that's one thing that is part of the embroidery skills. But on a regular basis, kind of flat textiles. It's like what they would wear as flat textiles. The embroidery will go more on the blouses I've shown at some point, the lacy ones, and then for the royal attire or dance attire as added. So there's some skills there. There were some makers, embroiderers with gold thread that are still continuing to the present day to some little extent, but supported by the royal family.
And one quick question about the garment care. So it's really hot, humid, tropical weather, climate, and then they wear this silk skirt or pants and then silk jacket or blouse. Is it soaked in sweat? Then how do you care for your garment afterwards?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that, I mean, which is fascinating to me because I'm, in Southeast Asia, I'm Vietnamese, but I live in, in the US, so I'm kind of lost the habit, but they don't sweat that much. Also, that's something I really notice when I'm there. I'm like dripping in sweat, which is not always very pleasant, but they have like a really good temperature management. I think that's something I've noticed. They don't sweat that much, but even so, one thing they do is to, that's also why I think it's losing popularity, and that's why Western style dress is gaining popularity, or they're even having polyester style of silk. They're copying and they're buying that in the market because it's cheaper and it's easier to clean. So that comes in the conversations. They will tell you, well, we have a few silk sets and then we wear, fake silk or fake style because it's easier, or so it's elastic, but because it's quite, you know, constricting also physically. So what they would do is like you can wash the silk with water and shampoo. That's one way to do so. Sometimes they just put them in the sun. The sun also has this kind of cleaning way, but there's not like yeah, it's quite simple in the way they approach that. Weavers or women that don't have a lot of means will have only one or two skirts, and they will wear them again and again and again. So they want to keep them in good conditions because it's so expensive. So they keep them folded, like protected in closets and stuff. And then, yeah, they would clean them with water or dust them out. But the sweating, I wouldn't say they sweat that much from what I've noticed.
Interesting. But silk is one of the textiles that they use, right? Like that's more like a ceremonial, you know, like a nice occasion clothes. Then what do people wear daily? Like a cotton or linen?
Well, daily they would wear cotton or polyester. Interestingly, they also buy the things they produce in garment factories. Like they would buy like H&M stuff, like without the tag, because it's produced, it's everywhere. So yeah, on a daily basis, it's mostly jeans and t-shirts, like very Western style dress. There's not going to be like in Laos, for example, cotton tube skirt and a silk tube skirt. It's going to be either Western style dress or ceremonial dress. And now obviously also moving into ceremonial Western style. So kind of losing the habit of wearing this blouse and the tube skirt as a whole. Yeah.
But is there any question from the audience? Any particular question? So I just checked the website, Artisan Encore, and then like their what is it? The jacket or blouse was like $85 or something. I guess it's US dollars. Not bad. And then I want to show, you know, my own like a e-cut scarf. This is made by. Hold on, let me turn off my video background. And this was also around $350. It was made by Japanese artisan. And then it took a while for him to weave it. But it's like a Japanese style ikat dyeing like this. But I can imagine, you know, Cambodians, they try hard to revive their tradition because it's lost, right? Which is really sad.
Yeah, I mean it's I wouldn't say like it's a full loss because of those initiatives, but it's been a struggle. And there's yeah, I think there's some structural changes to make to really support weavers in a way that is more long lasting. And I'm not saying that garment factories are bad. I'm just saying that they're competing. They're just competitors in terms of the offer. And that's something to think about. It's not like tradition is one way and, you know, globalization is another way. They're both part of the same landscape. That's something too that is a bit different. And there's a value in craftsmanship, I think, but there's also, you know, Cambodians have more means. For a long time, they were more drawn to brands or international brands and luxury brands. So there's a need for like maybe the high middle class Cambodian people to be more interested again in wearing silk and supporting it. I think that's also something that is slightly happening, but that is taking some time. So more changes to come. And also, I don't really know what COVID is going to make either to garment factories, but also to local weavers, because there's no tourism anymore with COVID, because the country is closed, and tourism is the main economic support of the country. Yeah.
Anyhow, thank you so much. And let me show you my dearest like emoticon. And so thank you again for introducing this rare, you know, materials of Cambodian silk. And you know, like FIT students, you can, you know, wave or, you know, say thank you, and then you can go to another class. If you have any other lingering questions, we can remain in the room and, you know, catch up for, you know, another.
Or you can email me later if you want.
Yeah,
I'm happy to share more content or sources or videos. I film a lot. I had a lot of films also. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to share them.
Thank you so much, Professor
so much.
Berthon,
Thank
and
you.
everybody. Bye. See you
Thank
next
you.
week,
Thank
my
you.
students. Bye. So thank you so much, Magali.
You're welcome. I hope that was okay. Sorry for the technical stuff.